Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that'll make you grateful you weren't at Woodstock 99. And no, I'm not talking about the riots, the fires, or the overflowing porta potties that turned into biohazard zones. I'm talking about a substance that promised enlightenment but delivered psychosis, that was supposed to bring people together but tore communities apart, and that transformed music festivals from peace and love gatherings into paranoid nightmares. We're talking about PCP, phencyclidine, angel dust, the drug that turned the summer of love into the season of what the hell just happened. So before you drift off into your clean drug-free sheets, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this. I genuinely appreciate those of you who suggested this topic. Your ideas shape this channel and make it what it is. Your input matters more than you know. And hey, the channel is now live on Spotify, so if you prefer listening there, check out the link in the description. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, get comfortable, and maybe double check that your water bottle actually contains water. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered how a drug developed as an anesthetic ended up destroying the festival scene? How did something created in a laboratory to help people end up making them believe they could fight off entire police departments? What was it about PCP that made users strip naked and try to fight traffic? Could a single drug really be responsible for changing how we think about psychedelics forever? And why did it take so long for people to realize this wasn't just another groovy trip? Congratulations! You've just woken up in 1967. The summer of love is blooming, and you're about to witness how the most dangerous drug in counterculture history went from operating rooms to festival grounds to ruining everything it touched. The flowers are in your hair, the music is playing, and someone just offered you something called Peace Pill. Spoiler alert, there's nothing peaceful about what comes next. Good luck. Let's start at the beginning, in a place that smells like chemicals and broken dreams, a pharmaceutical laboratory in 1956. Park Davis, a respectable drug company, was searching for the perfect anesthetic, something that could knock patients out without killing them, which, believe it or not, was harder than it sounds back then. Enter phencyclidine, molecule number CER395 in their experimental lineup. The chemist thought they'd created magic, a drug that could induce what they called dissociative anesthesia, where patients would remain conscious but completely disconnected from pain, from their bodies, from reality itself. Early tests on animals were promising. The creatures seemed calm, detached, perfectly manageable. Human trials began in 1957, and at first doctors were thrilled. Surgical, patients reported feeling like they were floating above their bodies, watching the operation from a peaceful distance. No pain, no panic, just a strange, dreamy detachment. It seemed like the future of medicine had arrived in a small glass vial. Picture yourself as one of those early researchers, lab coat pristine, clipboard in hand, genuinely believing you're about to revolutionize surgery. You watch as a patient receives an injection of your new wonder drug, and within minutes, their eyes glaze over in a way that's both fascinating and slightly unnerving. They're technically awake, their eyes are open, they're breathing normally, their vital signs are stable, but they're somewhere else entirely. When you ask them if they can feel the scalpel, they look at you like you're speaking a foreign language. Not because they don't understand, but because the question seems irrelevant to whatever reality they're currently inhabiting. The early medical literature is full of glowing reports. Doctors praised PCP's ability to provide anesthesia without the respiratory depression that made ether and chloroform so dangerous. Unlike other anesthetics that could stop your breathing if the dosage was slightly off, turning surgery into a very permanent nap, PCP seemed remarkably safe. Your heart kept beating, your lungs kept working, and you didn't feel a thing. It was like someone had simply unplugged your consciousness from your body and set it carefully to the side while the doctors did their work. The pharmaceutical reps from Park Davis were ecstatic. They could already see the dollar signs, a revolutionary anesthetic that was safer than anything else on the market, that could be used in field hospitals, emergency rooms, even dental offices. They branded it Cernal, a name meant to evoke serenity and safety. Training materials were printed, samples were distributed to hospitals across the country, and for a brief, shining moment, it looked like PCP would be the miracle drug that changed modern medicine forever. But here's the thing about dissociating someone's consciousness from their body. Sometimes it doesn't want to come back, or when it does come back, it returns wrong, fractured, paranoid, convinced that reality itself has become hostile. The researchers, so focused on the drug's effectiveness during surgery, hadn't spent nearly enough time studying what happened after. They'd created something that could separate mind from body with unprecedented efficiency, and they were about to discover that reassembly wasn't nearly as clean as disassembly. In those sterile laboratories, surrounded by beakers and Bunsen burners and the absolute confidence of mid-century medical science, nobody could have predicted that their miracle molecule would end up destroying music festivals, ruining lives, and becoming one of the most feared drugs in American history. They were just trying to make surgery less deadly. Instead, they'd created a chemical that would make reality itself feel like a hostile, incomprehensible nightmare. Congratulations, Park Davis. You tried to heal people and accidentally invented a liquid dissociation machine. What could possibly go wrong? But then the reports started coming in, and they weren't good. Patients were waking up screaming. Some claimed they'd been possessed by demons during surgery. Others insisted they'd died and come back wrong. One woman became convinced the surgical team had replaced her internal organs with machinery. Another patient, a mild-mannered accountant, tried to strangle a nurse because he believed she was a reptilian imposter. The medical term for what they were experiencing was emergence delirium, a polite way of saying people were losing their absolute minds. Doctors noticed a pattern. The dissociation didn't just separate patients from pain, it separated them from sanity. Hallucinations weren't gentle or dreamlike. They were terrifying, vivid, and often violent. Some patients couldn't speak for hours after waking, staring blankly at walls, their minds trapped somewhere between consciousness and a nightmare they couldn't escape. By 1965, Park Davis quietly pulled PCP from human use, restricting it to veterinary medicine. It was still useful for tranquilizing large animals, horses, elephants, the occasional angry bull. But for humans, the experiment was over. Except, of course, it wasn't. Imagine you're a nurse in a recovery room in 1962, and you've just watched a routine appendectomy. The surgery went perfectly. Textbook procedure, minimal bleeding, patient's vitals stable throughout. The surgeon is pleased with himself, already thinking about his afternoon golf game. You're monitoring the patient as they emerge from anesthesia, expecting the usual grogginess, maybe some nausea, perhaps a request for water. Instead, the patient's eyes snap open with an intensity that makes you take a step back. They're not looking at you, they're looking through you, something behind you, something that terrifies them beyond reason. They start screaming. Not the confused, disoriented sounds of someone waking up from normal anesthesia, but genuine terror, the kind of screaming you'd hear from someone being chased by something inhuman. They're trying to climb out of the bed, pulling at the IV lines, and when you try to calm them, they swing at you with surprising strength. "Get away from me!" they shriek. "You're not real! None of this is real. Security has to be called. It takes 4 people to hold them down while a doctor administers a sedative. Even then, they keep muttering about demons, about being trapped, about how the world had ended and nobody told them." This wasn't an isolated incident. Across hospitals using Cernal, similar reports were piling up. A construction worker who'd had a simple hernia repair became convinced his wife had been replaced by a duplicate and refused to let her near him for weeks. A teenager who'd undergone dental surgery spent 3 days insisting that God was speaking to him through the television, delivering messages about the end of the world. An elderly woman who'd had cataract surgery tried to jump out of a second-story hospital window because she believed the building was filling with poison gas. The medical community tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the dosage. They adjusted it downward. Maybe it was the patient population. They became more selective about who received it. Maybe it was the surgical environment. They tried to make recovery rooms quieter, dimmer, less stimulating. Nothing worked. The emergence delirium was unpredictable and unavoidable. Some patients were fine, others descended into psychosis. There was no way to know which would be which until they were already waking up, and by then it was too late. Doctors started keeping detailed notes about the hallucinations. They read like horror movie scripts. Patients reported seeing their flesh melt off, their bones, watching doctors transform into insects mid-surgery, feeling themselves split into multiple people occupying the same space. One man described being turned inside out and forced to watch his own organs working. Another swore he'd been dead for hours and was now a ghost haunting his own body. These weren't vague, dreamy experiences. They were vivid, concrete, absolutely convincing to the person experiencing them. By 1965, the writing was on the wall. Park Davis faced a choice: keep fighting to prove their miracle drug was safe, or cut their losses and move on. They chose the latter, pulling Sir Neil from human use and repositioning it as a veterinary anesthetic. After all, you can't really ask a horse if it's experiencing existential terror during surgery. The official statement was diplomatic, something about adverse reactions in a small percentage of patients, but internally the company knew the truth. They'd created something that worked too well, that severed the connection between mind and body so completely that sometimes the connection couldn't be properly restored. The drug was dead. Long live the drug. Because what the pharmaceutical company discontinued, the street was about to adopt. And unlike hospitals with their controlled doses and medical supervision, the street didn't care about emergence delirium. In fact, some people were about to start seeking it out on purpose. Here's the thing about discontinued drugs. They don't just disappear. By the late 1960s, underground chemists had gotten their hands on the formula for PCP, and they saw opportunity. LSD was popular, but it was hard to synthesize and required precursor chemicals that were increasingly monitored by authorities. PCP, on the other hand, was relatively easy to make in a basement lab with equipment you could order from a scientific supply catalogue. Even better, it was cheap, dirt cheap. You could produce massive quantities for almost nothing, and the profit margins were astronomical. Street chemists began cooking batches in makeshift labs, mixing PCP with everything from parsley flakes to mint leaves to disguise its chemical smell. They pressed it into pills, soaked it into cigarettes, dissolved it in liquids. It hit the streets under 100 different names: angel dust, rocket fuel, peace pill, hog, lovely, embalming fluid, wet sherm. Each name promised something different: enlightenment, power, transcendence. But they all delivered the same thing: chaos. By the early 70s, PCP had infiltrated every major city in America, and it was spreading fast. You're a college dropout in 1968 with a chemistry degree and no job prospects. The establishment doesn't want you. You've got long hair, radical politics, and a tendency to question authority that didn't go over well during interviews. But you do have knowledge, and that knowledge happens to be extremely valuable in the underground economy that's sprouting up, alongside the counterculture movement. You've heard through the grapevine that there's a discontinued anesthetic with a fairly simple synthesis pathway, and that people are willing to pay good money for substances that alter consciousness. You're not thinking about emergence delirium or psychotic breaks. You're thinking about rent money and maybe enough left over for concert tickets. Setting up a lab is almost comically easy. You rent a cheap apartment in a building where nobody asks questions, order glassware and chemicals from legitimate suppliers, no red flags yet because you're not making anything illegal enough to be monitored, and within a few weeks, you're cooking your first batch. The synthesis is straightforward enough that someone with basic organic chemistry knowledge can pull it off. You're not making pharmaceutical-grade product here. This is crude, impure, but it works. The first batch yields a white powder that looks innocent enough like powdered sugar or baby powder. The question becomes, how do you sell it? You can't exactly advertise, so you start small, telling friends you've got something new, something different from the acid that's flooding the market. You price it low at first, building up a customer base. Some of your early adopters love it. They report feeling powerful, invincible, capable of experiencing reality from impossible angles. They come back for more. Others have bad experiences, but in the drug culture of the late 60s, bad trips are almost expected. Nobody blames the drug. They blame their own mindset, their environment, their cosmic readiness. Word spreads. Other amateur chemists hear about the easy money and start their own operations. Within months, there are dozens of labs producing PCP across major cities. Quality control is non-existent. Some batches are relatively pure, others are contaminated with toxic byproducts of sloppy synthesis. Doses vary wildly because nobody's measuring carefully. One pill might contain 5 milligrams, another might contain 50. Users have no way of knowing what they're getting. The street names multiply, each one sounding more appealing than the last. Angel dust sounds mystical, spiritual. Peace pill promises the tranquility everyone's seeking. Rocket fuel hints at the power and energy users report feeling. What none of these names mention is the paranoia, the violence, the feeling that your skin is trying to escape your body, or the very real possibility that you'll spend the next 6 hours convinced you're trapped in a dimension where time has stopped and everyone around you is a hostile entity wearing a human mask. Dealers start cutting other drugs with PCP because it's so cheap, and the effects are strong enough to convince users they're getting their money's worth. Your marijuana might be dusted without your knowledge. Your cocaine might be stretched with it. Those pills sold as mescaline. There's a decent chance they're actually PCP pressed with food colouring and sold to someone who doesn't know any better. The market's unregulated, chaotic and growing exponentially. By the early 70s, law enforcement is starting to notice, but they're playing catch-up. By the time they shut down one lab, 3 more have opened. The drug that hospitals abandoned has found a second life on the streets, and unlike the controlled medical environment where emergence delirium was a treatable side effect, out here, it's just Tuesday. Nobody's monitoring vital signs or ready with sedatives. If you have a bad reaction, you're on your own. And if you hurt yourself or someone else in the process, well, that's just the cost of enlightenment. Also, the dealers tell you while counting their profits. The counterculture movement of the late 60s was built on experimentation. Young people were rejecting the rigid conformity of their parents' generation, seeking new ways to expand consciousness, to see beyond the veil of ordinary reality. LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, these were sacraments, tools for spiritual exploration. So when PCP appeared, marketed as just another psychedelic, another key to unlock the doors of perception, people didn't ask questions, they just took it. At first, the effects seemed similar enough to other hallucinogens. Users reported feeling detached, floating, seeing colours more vividly. But there was something else, something darker lurking beneath the surface. Unlike LSD, which often produced gentle, introspective experiences, PCP was aggressive. It didn't invite you to explore your mind. It kicked down the door and set everything on fire. Users described feeling invincible, superhuman, capable of impossible feats. One man claimed he could communicate with plants. Another tried to stop a train with his bare hands, convinced he had the power. A woman walked into the ocean believing she could breathe underwater. The counterculture, so eager to embrace altered states, had accidentally welcomed a monster into their midst. You're 22 years old, it's 1969, and you've dropped acid maybe a dozen times. Each experience has been profound in its own way. You've watched sunsets that seem to contain all of human history, had conversations with friends that felt like touching the underlying unity of existence, stared at your hand and understood, really understood, the miracle of consciousness inhabiting flesh. LSD has been good to you. It's shown you that reality is more flexible than you'd been taught, that there are ways of perceiving the world that go beyond the narrow materialistic viewpoint your parents tried to instill. So when someone at a party offers you a peace pill, saying it's like mescaline but smoother, you don't hesitate. You're experienced. You know how to handle altered states. You've got your favourite album ready, some fruit for later when your appetite returns, and friends around to share the journey. You swallow the pill with a sip of cheap wine and wait for the familiar come-up, the slight anxiety, the shift in perception, the sense that something interesting is about to happen. What happens instead is nothing like your previous experiences. Within 20 minutes you feel wrong. Not high, not euphoric, just wrong. Like someone has adjusted the fundamental settings of your consciousness and forgotten to write down the original configuration. Your body feels distant, like you're piloting it via remote control with a significant delay between intention and action. You try to stand up and it takes 3 attempts because your legs don't seem to be receiving clear instructions from your brain. Your friends are talking, but their voices sound mechanical, synthetic, like bad audio recordings rather than living humans. You try to tell them something's off, but the words come out garbled, and you can't quite remember what you wanted to say anyway. Time does something impossible. It doesn't slow down or speed up. It fractures, becomes non-linear. You're experiencing this moment, the one 5 minutes ago, and one from tomorrow all simultaneously, and none of them feel quite real. Then the paranoia hits. Unlike the occasional anxiety that can accompany an acid trip, easily soothed by changing the music or moving to a different room, this paranoia is absolute and unshakable. You become convinced that your friends aren't your friends at all, but elaborate simulations designed to test you, to trick you, to harvest something from you. When they try to calm you down, their reassurances sound like lies, like exactly what a simulation would say to keep you compliant. You leave the party, walking out into the night because staying inside feels like being buried alive. The street looks wrong, too bright, too geometric, too artificial. You have the overwhelming certainty that you've died, and this is some kind of processing station before whatever comes next. A car drives by, and you're convinced you could stop it with your mind, that the physical laws everyone else is bound by don't apply to you anymore. You step into the street to test this theory. Fortunately, the driver sees you and swerves. You don't remember much after that. Fragments of being on the ground, of sounds that might be sirens, of someone putting a blanket over you even though you're burning up, of trying to explain that you're not really there, that none of this is really happening, that everyone needs to wake up from this shared delusion before it's too late. You come back to yourself 16 hours later in a strange apartment with people you don't recognize, your clothes torn, your knuckles bruised, no memory of how you got there or what you did in between. Your friends later tell you that you tried to fight a mailbox, convinced it was following you, that you climbed onto someone's roof and wouldn't come down for hours, that you kept insisting you were trapped in a government experiment and needed to break free. This wasn't spiritual exploration. This wasn't expanding consciousness. This was your consciousness being torn apart and scattered, leaving something primitive and terrified piloting your body through a reality that had become hostile and incomprehensible. And the worst part, Some people in the counterculture heard stories like this and thought it sounded interesting, like a challenge, like the ultimate test of mental fortitude. The counterculture's openness to experience, usually its greatest strength, had become a vulnerability. Not every door should be opened. Not every state of consciousness is worth exploring. Some thresholds, once crossed, damage you in ways that don't heal. Music festivals in the late 60s and early 70s were supposed to be utopias, temporary cities where thousands gathered to celebrate music, community and freedom. Woodstock 69 had set the template. 500,000 people, 3 days of music, and a collective belief that love could actually change the world. But by the time the early 70s rolled around, something had shifted. PCP had infiltrated the festival circuit, often sold to unsuspecting festival goers as mescaline or THC. Dealers knew that once someone took it, they probably wouldn't complain. They'd be too busy trying to figure out if they were still human. At outdoor festivals where heat, dehydration and sleep deprivation were already pushing people to their physical limits, adding PCP to the mix was like throwing gasoline on a bonfire. The first incidents were small, easy to dismiss. A guy running naked through a campsite convinced his skin was melting. A woman sitting motionless for 6 hours staring at her hands. But then the violence started. You've arrived at a music festival in 1972 somewhere in California, where the summer heat sits on your shoulders like a physical weight. You've been looking forward to this for months. 3 days of music, camping under the stars, being part of something larger than yourself. The festival grounds are already filling up when you arrive Friday afternoon. Thousands of people setting up tents, spreading blankets, sharing food and joints and wine in that casual communal way that makes these gatherings feel like glimpses of a better world. The first night is perfect. The music is transcendent, the crowd is peaceful, and you fall asleep to the sound of someone playing acoustic guitar near a distant campfire. But Saturday is when things start to feel off. The heat is oppressive, making the air shimmer and turning the dusty field into a kind of open-air oven. People are moving slower, drinking less water than they should because the only source is a distant spigot with a long line. Everyone's a little dehydrated, a little sleep-deprived, a little sunburned, but that's par for the course at festivals. You're sitting with friends near the main stage when someone, you're never quite sure who, offers around what they say are mescaline capsules. Festival currency is all about sharing, and you've all been trading substances casually for 2 days. Someone gave you their last cigarette yesterday. You gave someone else half your sandwich this morning. It's how things work here. So when the capsules come around, you take one without much thought. Your friends do too. Within an hour you realise something is very wrong. The music sounds hostile, aggressive, like it's attacking rather than entertaining. The crowd around you has transformed into something threatening. A mass of bodies that feels less like a community and more like a trap. You need space, air, escape. You stand up too quickly and the world tilts sideways. Your friends try to grab your arm, ask if you're okay, but their touch feels like electricity, like they're trying to drain something from you. You pull away and start walking, then running, pushing through the crowd with no destination in mind except away. Behind you, one of your friends is having a similar experience but expressing it differently. They've become convinced that the festival is a government experiment, that everyone here has been dosed with something, and that the only rational response is to fight back against the conspiracy. They're shouting warnings to strangers, grabbing people by the shoulders to shake them awake, getting increasingly agitated when people try to calm them down. Security is called, but they don't know what they're dealing with. This isn't someone who had too much to drink or is having a bad acid trip. This is something else entirely. You end up at the edge of the festival grounds near the fence line, where you've torn off your shirt because your skin feels like it's trying to crawl off your body. The heat inside you is unbearable, like your blood has been replaced with gasoline and someone struck a match. You're dimly aware that people are watching you, calling out, but their voices sound synthesized, artificial, not quite human. Time has stopped making sense. You might have been standing here for 5 minutes or 5 hours, there's no way to tell. Eventually festival medical staff find you. They're young volunteers, trained in basic first aid and handed pamphlets about handling bad trips, completely unprepared for what PCP does to people. They try to lead you to the medical tent, but you resist, convinced they're part of whatever's happening, that the tent is where they're processing people, converting them into something else. It takes 4 of them to get you there, and even then you keep trying to leave, to warn others, to do something, you're not quite sure what, to fix whatever's gone horribly wrong with reality. In the medical tent, you're not alone. 3 other people are there, all exhibiting similar symptoms. Paranoia, aggression, hyperthermia, that characteristic blank stare that suggests nobody's home behind the eyes. The medical volunteers are overwhelmed, radioing for additional help, trying to keep people from hurting themselves or each other. One patient has ripped out their IV line twice. Another won't stop screaming about demons in the speakers. The tent has transformed from a place of healing into a kind of field hospital, treating casualties from a war nobody declared. By Sunday morning, word has spread through the festival. Don't take the capsules, don't trust the mescaline. Something bad is going around. But the warning comes too late for dozens of people who are still riding out nightmares they didn't know they'd signed up for. The music continues, but the vibe has shifted. People are more cautious, more suspicious. The utopian vision of the festival has cracked, and through that crack something dark has slithered in. Welcome to the new festival experience, where peace and love share space with paranoia and psychosis, and nobody knows which they'll encounter until it's too late. It happened at a small festival in Northern California in 1972. The name of the festival has been lost to time, but what happened there became legend. A 23-year-old man, we'll call him Michael, bought what he thought was a tab of mescaline from a vendor selling organic sacraments. Within an hour, Michael was convinced that everyone at the festival was part of a government conspiracy to harvest his organs. He attacked a security guard, threw a trash can through a vendor's booth, and tried to climb the main stage during a performance, screaming about demons in the amplifiers. It took 8 people to restrain him, and even then he kept fighting, displaying strength that seemed impossible for someone his size. Medical personnel were called, but they had no idea what they were dealing with. Michael's pupils were normal, not dilated like they'd expect with LSD or shrunken like with opiates. His heart rate was through the roof, his temperature dangerous, and he was sweating profusely despite the cool evening air. He was eventually sedated and transported to a hospital, where he remained in a psychotic state for 3 days. When he finally came down, Michael had no memory of the incident, but the festival had changed. Word spread quickly. Something new was out there, something dangerous. You're working security at this festival, a gig you took because it pays $50 for the weekend and gets you in free. You're not a cop, just a college kid who's big enough to look intimidating in a yellow vest. Your job is supposed to be simple: check tickets, make sure people aren't sneaking in alcohol, maybe break up the occasional argument between drunk campers. Nobody mentioned anything about restraining someone who's convinced reality itself has become hostile. Michael catches your attention because he's moving wrong. It's early evening, the sun just starting to set, and most people are settling into that mellow festival headspace, dancing slowly, passing joints, watching the sky turn orange and purple. But Michael is pacing in tight circles near the main stage, muttering to himself, occasionally stopping to stare at people with an intensity that makes them uncomfortable enough to move away. You've seen people on acid before. They usually look fascinated or confused, not furious. This is different. You approach him carefully, using your friendliest voice. "Hey man, you doing okay?" He turns to look at you, and his eyes are wrong. Not the pupils, those are normal, but the expression behind them. It's like looking at someone who's seeing through you into another dimension that's making them extremely angry. "You're one of them," he says flatly. "You're all in on it. I know what you're doing here." His voice is calm, which somehow makes it more unsettling than if he were shouting. Before you can respond, he's moving. Not running exactly, but walking with such aggressive purpose that people scatter in front of him. He makes a beeline for a vendor booth selling jewellery and, without breaking stride, flips the entire table over. Necklaces scatter across the dusty ground, the vendor shouts in protest, and now everyone's looking. You try to grab his arm, your training said to use minimal force to de-escalate, but the moment you touch him, he spins around and shoves you backward with shocking strength. You stumble, catch yourself, and radio for backup. We've got a situation at the main stage. Guys flipping out might need medical. Your radio crackles back. Define flipping out. Bad trip? You watch as Michael picks up a metal trash can, one of those heavy cylindrical ones that must weigh 40 pounds, and hurls it at a food stand. It crashes through the wooden siding like the structure is made of cardboard. Negative, you say into the radio. This is something else. 3 more security guards arrive and the 4 of you form a loose circle around Michael, trying to contain him without getting too close. He's breathing heavily now, sweat pouring down his face despite the cooling evening air. His shirt is soaked through. He's pulling at it, yanking, at the fabric like it's suffocating him. "Too hot," he mutters. "Everything's too hot. You're all burning." Then he tears his shirt off completely, reveals a torso covered in scratches, self-inflicted looks like, though he doesn't seem to notice them bleeding. Someone in the gathering crowd, because of course a crowd has formed, suggests maybe he just needs water, needs to cool down, needs someone to talk him through whatever he's experiencing. A well-meaning woman approaches with a bottle of water, speaking in that soft therapeutic voice people use with frightened animals. "Hey, it's okay, you're safe, just take some water." Michael looks at her for a long moment, and you can see him processing, trying to make sense of what she is. Then he screams, not words, just a raw, primal sound, and charges toward the main stage where a band is trying to continue performing despite the commotion. He makes it onto the stage before anyone can stop him. The band stops playing, backing away from this. Wild-eyed, shirtless man who's now grabbing microphones, pulling at cables, shouting about demons and signals, and needing to shut it all down before it's too late. The lead singer tries to calm him. "Hey brother, it's cool, we're all friends here." But Michael grabs him by the shoulders and shakes him violently, yelling, "Wake up! None of this is real. They're using the music to control us." That's when you and the other guards rush the stage. It takes all 4 of you to pull him off the singer, and even then he's fighting with a strength that doesn't match his frame. His muscles are rigid, almost vibrating with tension. You've got his arms pinned, another guard has his legs, and he's still trying to break free, still shouting about conspiracies and demons and harvesting organs. His skin is burning hot to the touch, fever hot, and the sweat is pouring off him in streams. The festival organizer makes a decision. Call for an ambulance. This is beyond what volunteer medical staff can handle. While you're waiting, it'll take at least 20 minutes for emergency services to reach this rural location. You and the other guards have to keep Michael restrained on the ground. He's not calming down. If anything, he's getting more agitated, more convinced that you're the enemy, that you're part of whatever dark plot he's uncovered. He tries to bite one guard, headbutts another. The strength is unnatural, like his brain has removed all the normal safety limits that keep people from injuring themselves. A nurse from the medical tent arrives with a sedative, but the first dose doesn't touch him, nor the second. They're pumping enough tranquilizer into him to drop a horse, and he's still thrashing, still fighting, still absolutely certain that he's battling for his life against forces trying to destroy him. When the ambulance finally arrives, the EMTs take one look at the situation and call for police backup. They've dealt with PCP before. They know this dance. Michael is eventually loaded into the ambulance, still restrained, still fighting, still trapped in whatever nightmare dimension the drug has locked him into. The festival continues, but everyone who witnessed it is shaken. The band can't get back into the groove. The crowd disperses uneasily, and you're standing there with bruises forming on your arms, watching the ambulance lights disappear down the dirt road, realizing that your simple weekend security gig just became a story you'll be telling for the rest of your life. The story of the night a drug you'd never heard of turned a music festival into a battlefield, and nobody, not you, not medical staff, not even the guy who took it, knew what hit them until it was way too late. Musicians started noticing it too. Backstage at concerts, roadies would whisper warnings. Don't accept anything called angel dust. Don't smoke anything you didn't roll yourself. Watch the crowd for people who aren't blinking. Some bands began hiring extra security not to control the audience, but to identify people who'd taken PCP before they could hurt themselves or others. The Grateful Dead, veterans of the psychedelic scene, openly spoke against PCP at their shows. Jerry Garcia called it a nightmare disguised as a dream. But the warnings often came too late. At a concert in Detroit, a man on PCP climbed a lighting truss 30 feet above the stage, convinced he could fly. Security talked him down after an hour-long standoff, but the show had to be stopped. At another venue, a woman broke through a plate glass window with her bare hands, cutting herself severely but feeling no pain, wandering through the parking lot leaving a trail of blood while asking strangers if they'd seen her soul. You're a sound engineer for a mid-level rock band touring through the Midwest in 1974. You've seen your share of concert chaos, crowd surges, equipment failures, the occasional stage invasion by over-enthusiastic fans. You've worked shows where the entire audience seemed to be on acid, where people were so high they forgot how to sit down. But PCP is different, and you're learning that the hard way. Tonight's show is at a converted warehouse in Detroit. The venue holds about 2,000 people, and it's packed, hot, loud, the kind of environment where anything can happen and usually does. You're at the mixing board, adjusting levels, when your attention is pulled to a commotion in the crowd, about 50 feet from the stage. Someone's pushing through people with mechanical aggression, not dancing or celebrating, just moving forward with single-minded purpose. The crowd parts around him like he's radioactive. He reaches the front barrier, and instead of pressing against it like a normal fan trying to get closer, he grabs it with both hands and starts shaking it violently. Security moves in, two guys built like refrigerators, but when they try to escort him away, he turns on them with such sudden violence that one guard goes down, immediately holding his face. The other guard manages to get an arm around the guy's neck, but he's lifted off his feet and thrown backward into the crowd. That's when the climber starts ascending the lighting truss. These structures aren't meant to be climbed. They're essentially scaffolding hung with thousands of pounds of lights and speakers, held together with bolts and faith. But the guy is scaling it like it's a playground jungle gym, moving with an unsettling combination of speed and mechanical precision. He's not looking down, not acknowledging the shouts from below, just climbing with absolute focus toward the lights suspended 30 feet above the concrete floor. The band stops playing. The house lights come up. Everyone in the venue is now watching this man climb higher, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a malfunctioning robot. You can see security on radios, venue management running around in a panic, someone suggesting they call the fire department. Meanwhile, the climber has reached the top of the truss and is now standing, actually standing, not holding on a narrow beam, arms spread wide, looking down at the crowd with an expression you can see even from your position at the mixing board. It's not fear. It's not excitement. It's something else entirely, something that makes your stomach drop. "I can fly," he announces, his voice somehow carrying across the now silent venue. "I can see everything from up here. The patterns, the connections. I'm not bound by your physics anymore." A collective gasp from the crowd. Security is desperately trying to figure out how to reach him without causing him to fall or jump. Someone suggests getting a ladder, but ladders don't go that high. And even if they did, what then? Send someone up to tackle him 30 feet above a concrete floor? The band's frontman, a veteran of thousands of shows and probably thousands of drugs, approaches the front of the stage and looks up. "Hey man," he calls out, his voice, reasonable and calm, amplified through the PA system. "That's a heavy trip you're on. We've all been there. But maybe you want to come down now. We've got water, we've got a quiet room, we can help you ride it out." The climber looks down at him, processing, his face cycling through expressions like he's working through a complicated equation. "You're not real," he finally says. "None of this is real. I'm already dead. This is the processing center." For the next hour, the standoff continues. Security has evacuated most of the crowd for their own safety, leaving just essential personnel and a handful of people trained in crisis intervention. They're trying every approach, reasoning with him, offering him things, even attempting to sing to him to create a calming atmosphere. Nothing works. He's locked in a reality only he can perceive, and in that reality, the rest of you are background characters, NPCs in a game he's not interested in playing. Eventually the fire department arrives with an aerial ladder. They manage to position it near the truss, and a firefighter trained in high-angle rescue begins the slow, terrifying process of approaching the climber from above. It's delicate work. Any sudden movement could startle him into jumping or falling. The firefighter is talking the entire time, voice low and soothing, closing the distance inch by inch. When he finally gets close enough, he doesn't grab the climber, just extends a hand. "I'm here to help you down," he says simply. "Let's go together." Something in that simple statement breaks through. The climber looks at the firefighter, really looks at him, and you can see the moment of recognition. Not that he suddenly understands where he is or what's happening, but that he recognizes an offered hand, the universal gesture of help. He takes it. The descent is agonizingly slow, the firefighter keeping up a steady stream of reassurance, the climber moving like a sleepwalker, detached but compliant. When his feet finally touch the ground, he collapses. EMTs rush in with a stretcher, checking his vitals while he stares at the ceiling of the venue, tears streaming down his face. "I saw God," he whispers, "and God was a machine, and the machine was screaming." Then he's loaded into an ambulance and gone, leaving behind a venue full of shaken crew members, cancelled show, and the disturbing understanding that the concert experience, once a space of joy and connection, has been infiltrated by something that turns people into unpredictable, dangerous strangers to themselves. The band's manager makes an announcement. From now on, there will be additional security specifically trained to spot PCP users before things escalate. There will be warnings in the lobby. There will be a zero-tolerance policy for anyone caught selling it at shows. But even as these policies are being written, they're reactive, defensive. The drug is already here, already woven into the concert scene, and all anyone can do is try to minimize the damage while the music plays on, and people keep climbing toward lights they think will set them free. One of the most notorious aspects of PCP use is the tendency for users to remove their clothing, often in public, often in dangerous situations. It's become a dark punchline in drug culture, but the reality is disturbing. PCP causes severe hyperthermia. The body's temperature rises dramatically, often to dangerous levels. Users feel like they're burning alive from the inside, even in cold weather. The drug also disrupts the body's ability to regulate temperature, and creates a profound disconnection from physical sensation. So when someone on PCP rips off their clothes and runs screaming into traffic or a frozen lake, they're not acting out some drug-induced fantasy. They're desperately trying to cool down a body that feels like it's cooking from within. At festivals, this led to dozens of incidents. Naked people running through crowds, diving into rivers, rolling in mud, anything to escape the unbearable heat. Security teams were trained to recognize the signs: excessive sweating, flushed skin, aggressive behavior, and yes, public nudity. But training could only do so much. You're a security guard at a summer festival in 1973, and it's 2 a.m. Most of the crowd has settled into their campsites, the main stage has gone dark, and you're doing a perimeter walk, mostly to stay awake. The temperature has dropped into the 50s, comfortable sleeping weather, the kind of night where you'd want a blanket and maybe a sweatshirt. So when you see someone sprinting through the campground completely naked, you know immediately that something is very wrong. The runner isn't alone. Behind them, a small group of concerned festival goers is giving chase, calling out, "Stop! You're going to hurt yourself!" But the naked runner isn't listening. They're moving with purpose, arms pumping, breathing hard, heading toward the creek that runs along the eastern edge of the festival grounds. You key your radio, need backup at the east perimeter. We've got a runner, no clothes, heading for the water. The response is immediate. PCP. You watch the runner's movements, jerky, mechanical, faster than seems natural. Probably, you confirm. You intercept them about 50 yards from the creek, stepping into their path with your hands raised in what you hope is a non-threatening gesture. Up close, you can see that they're drenched in sweat, their skin almost glowing with heat, steam rising off their body into the cool night air. Their eyes are wide but unfocused, looking through you rather than at you. "Hey," you say, keeping your voice calm and level. Let's slow down for a second. Where are you headed? They try to push past you, and their skin is shocking to touch, fever hot, slick with sweat. "The water," they gasp. "Need the water. I'm burning. Can't you see? I'm on fire." You can see that they're not on fire, that there are no flames, but you also understand that whatever they're experiencing is absolutely real to them. Their body temperature is dangerously elevated. You don't need a thermometer to know that just from touching their arm. This isn't a metaphor or a hallucination. This is a medical emergency dressed up as a bad trip. You try to guide them to sit down, to stay put while you call medical, but they're having none of it. "I need to get in the water," they insist, their voice rising in panic. "Why won't you let me in the water? Are you trying to kill me?" By now your backup has arrived. 2 other guards and a volunteer from the medical tent who's brought a blanket and a first aid kit, neither of which seem adequate for this situation. The medic tries to check the runner's vital signs, but they won't stay still long enough. They're shifting from foot to foot, still trying to move toward the creek, pouring at their own skin like they can scrape the heat away. "I'm melting," they moan. "My skin is melting off. Can feel it dripping down my bones." You've been trained for this, sort of. The training consisted of a 2-hour session where a bored EMT explained that PCP users might strip naked and that you should try to keep them from harming themselves or others until paramedics arrive. But the training didn't cover the psychological weight of watching another human being suffer from a hallucination so vivid, so physically manifested, that they're literally trying to escape their own burning body. The training didn't explain how helpless you'd feel, watching someone who needs medical intervention that won't arrive for another 20 minutes at least. The runner breaks free, slipping through your group with surprising agility, and makes it to the creek. They plunge in head first, submerging completely in water that can't be more than 60 degrees. You expect them to surface immediately, shocked by the cold, but they stay under for an unnaturally long time. You're about to go in after them when they finally emerge, gasping, standing waist deep in the current. "It's not working," they say, their voice breaking. "The fire is inside, the water can't reach it." What do I do? Somebody tell me what to do. You wade in, the water is shockingly cold against your legs, and guide them back to shore. They're shivering now, teeth chattering, but still insisting they're burning up. Their body can't reconcile the conflicting signals, the drug telling them they're overheating while the frigid water triggers every cold receptor they have. You wrap the blanket around them, but they immediately try to throw it off. "No, no more heat, please," they beg. The medic is explaining to them that they need to keep the blanket on, that their core temperature is dangerously high and they're at risk of seizure or worse, but the logic doesn't penetrate. How do you explain medical reality to someone whose reality has been chemically rewritten? The ambulance finally arrives and the EMTs take over with the practiced efficiency of people who've done this before. They're already preparing an IV, checking pupils, asking questions the runner can't coherently answer. One EMT looks at you and the other guards. "How long's the water been this cold?" you tell him. He nods grimly. Probably saved their life, even if they didn't know it. Sometimes the hyperthermia is the real killer, not the psychological effects. They load the runner onto a stretcher, still wrapped in the blanket they're trying to reject, still mumbling about fire and burning and needing to escape, and drive off into the night. You're left standing by the creek in the pre-dawn darkness, your pants soaked, your radio crackling with reports of another incident on the west side of the festival grounds. Someone else running naked, someone else desperate to cool down a fire that only exists in their chemically altered nervous system. You think about the training session, about the EMT's bored voice explaining that PCP disrupts, thermoregulation. Those were just words then, clinical and abstract. Now you understand what they mean in practice. They mean watching someone burn in a fire nobody else can see, while the only tool they have to fight it, stripping away layers, seeking water, seeking cold, makes them vulnerable in ways they can't comprehend. They mean learning that sometimes helping someone means restraining them from their own desperate survival instincts, even when those instincts are screaming that you're the threat. Welcome to PCP Security Protocol, where the enemy isn't the drug or the user, but the gap between their reality and yours. What truly separated PCP from other drugs circulating through the festival scene was the violence. LSD might make you paranoid, marijuana might make you sleepy, cocaine might make you talk too much, but PCP made people dangerous. The drug doesn't just alter perception, it removes inhibition, eliminates pain response, and can induce a psychotic state that's indistinguishable from schizophrenia. Users have been known to display what emergency responders call superhuman strength, not because the drug actually makes them stronger, but because it removes the brain's natural limiters that prevent us from injuring ourselves. Normally, your brain won't let you use 100% of your muscle capacity because you tear your own tendons and break your own bones. PCP removes those safeguards. At festivals, this translated to terrifying encounters. People lifting objects they shouldn't be able to move, fighting off multiple attackers without feeling pain, continuing aggressive behavior even after being tasered or pepper sprayed. You're working as a volunteer medic at a festival in 1975, and you thought you were prepared for anything. You've handled overdoses, heat stroke, bad acid trips, and even a couple of heart attacks. You've got your first aid certification, a tackle box full of supplies, and a radio to call for backup when things get serious. But nothing in your training covered what to do when a person stops being bound by normal human limitations. The call comes in around midnight. Medical to the North Camping area. Multiple people injured. Possible assault. You grab your kit and jog toward the scene, expecting maybe a fight over a stolen tent or some drunk argument that got out of hand. What you find instead is a semicircle of people, keeping their distance from a single individual. We'll call him Jake. who's standing in the centre of a clearing, breathing heavily, fists clenched, blood streaming down his arms from wounds he doesn't seem to notice. The people in the semicircle are festival security and concerned campers. 3 of them are injured, one holding a towel to a bleeding nose, another cradling an arm that's bent at a wrong angle, a third sitting on the ground with a dazed expression that suggests possible concussion. What happened, you ask, and multiple people try to answer at once. The story that emerges is chaotic but consistent. Jake had been sitting peacefully by a campfire, then suddenly stood up, announced that everyone was trying to steal his thoughts, and started attacking anyone who came near him. You approach slowly, hands visible, using the calm voice you've practiced for situations like this. "Hey Jake, I'm here to help. Looks like you got some cuts there. Mind if I take a look?" He turns to face you, and his eyes are wrong. Not dilated or constricted, but flat, like looking at a shark. "You're not real," he says matter-of-factly. "None of you are real. This is a test. I know what this is." He holds up his arm, showing deep lacerations that should be causing significant pain. "See? I can't feel it. That's how I know you're not real. Real things hurt." Before you can respond, he's moving. Not toward you, but toward a nearby picnic table, one of those heavy wooden ones that probably weighs 200 pounds. He grabs it by one end and flips it over with a casual motion that defies physics, sending camping equipment flying. Someone screams. Security guards are radioing for police backup, their voices tight with tension. You're backing away slowly, maintaining eye contact, trying to remember if your training covered anything about superhuman strength. It didn't. Jake picks up a cooler, the big kind, the kind that takes 2 people to carry when it's full, and hurls it across the campsite. It crashes into a tent, collapsing the structure. He's breathing harder now, not from exertion, but from something else, some internal fire burning through his nervous system. 2 security guards try to restrain him, coming from opposite sides, using the buddy system they were taught in training. It doesn't matter. Jake throws one off like they weigh nothing and punches the other with such force that you hear the impact from 20 feet away. The guard who got punched goes down hard, not moving. Now you're running forward with your medical kit because that's your job. But Jake is still standing there, fists raised, ready to fight anyone who approaches. You make a split-second decision. Ignore Jake. Get to the injured guard. You drop next to the unconscious man and check his pulse. Fast but steady, thank God. And his breathing. Shallow but present. He's got a rapidly swelling jaw and possibly a concussion, but he's alive. Behind you, more security has arrived, and they're trying to form a barrier between Jake and the rest of the campsite. But Jake isn't interested in them anymore. He's spotted the forest at the edge of the festival grounds and decides that's where he needs to go. That the trees hold the answers, that getting away from these hallucinations, pretending to be people, is the only rational choice. He runs, and nobody tries to stop him. It's too dangerous, and maybe in the woods he'll be less of a threat to others. Police arrive 15 minutes later with K9 units to track Jake through the forest. They find him an hour after that 2 miles from the festival, trying to climb a tree that's too thin to support his weight. He's fallen multiple times. The officers can see evidence of this in the scrapes and bruises covering his body, but he keeps trying, kept going by the drug's complete suppression of his pain receptors. When they finally get him down and into custody, it takes 6 officers to hold him long enough for EMTs to sedate him. Even then, the first dose of sedative doesn't work, neither does the second. They end up using enough tranquilizer to drop a large animal, and Jake is still mumbling about reality being fake as they load him into the ambulance. Back at the medical tent, you're treating the injured, the guard with the broken jaw, the camper with the fractured arm, the various cuts and bruises and the psychic trauma of watching someone they considered a peaceful fellow festival goer transform into something dangerous and unpredictable. Nobody's pressing charges. They all understand on some level that Jake wasn't in control, that he was as much a victim of the drug as they were victims of his altered state. But understanding doesn't make it less scary. The festival continues through the night, but a new tension has settled over everything. People are more watchful, more suspicious. That communal trust that made festivals feel safe, the assumption that everyone there was part of the same peaceful tribe, has been compromised. Because now you know that someone sitting peacefully by a fire might with no warning become a threat that takes half a dozen people to restrain. You know that the human body, when freed from its normal safety limits, is capable of damage that seems impossible, and you know that no amount of first aid training prepares you for the moment when the person you're trying to help is simultaneously the person you need to stay away from. Festival medical tents, usually set up to handle minor injuries, heat exhaustion, and the occasional bad trip, were completely unprepared for PCP. Traditional methods for calming down anxious or hallucinating patients didn't work. Benzodiazepines, typically effective for LSD-related panic, barely touched PCP psychosis. Physical restraints sometimes made things worse, triggering more violent responses. Medical volunteers, often just trained in basic first aid, found themselves dealing with patients who were actively psychotic, sometimes violent, and always unpredictable. One doctor, who worked festival circuits in the 70s, described treating a PCP user as like trying to give therapy to a hurricane. "They're not in there anymore," he said. "The person you're trying to reach is gone, and what's left is just primal fear and aggression." The protocol eventually became isolate, minimize stimulation, wait it out. But waiting could mean hours, sometimes days, of keeping a violent, delusional patient contained while their brains slowly metabolized the drug. It was exhausting, dangerous work, and it changed how medical teams prepared for festivals. You're a volunteer nurse at a festival medical tent in 1976, and your shift started 8 hours ago. You've already treated 24 people, mostly dehydration, a few sprained ankles, one guy who ate a mushroom he found growing near his tent and immediately regretted it, and a steady stream of people having anxiety attacks on LSD who just needed a quiet space and reassurance. It's been busy but manageable, the kind of organized chaos you've come to expect from festival medicine. Then the radio crackles. Medical, be advised. Incoming PCP case. ETA, 2 minutes. Patient is combative. Security is bringing them in restrained. You and the other volunteers exchange looks. Everyone in festival medicine has heard the stories by now. PCP patients are different. You can't talk them down, can't reassure them that everything's okay, can't use the gentle therapeutic approach that works for people having bad trips on other substances. PCP removes the person and leaves behind something primitive, terrified, and dangerous. You start preparing, clearing space in the tent, moving sharp objects out of reach, making sure you have clear access to exits. The other nurse asks if you've called for police backup. You have. They said they're 20 minutes out. When security brings the patient in, you understand immediately why they radioed ahead. It's taking 4 guards to move one person, and they're not walking so much as dragging them. The patient, a woman in her 20s, we'll call her Sarah, is fighting every step, screaming incoherently, trying to bite, kick, headbutt anyone within range. Her strength is shocking. These are trained security guards, people who work out, who know how to handle difficult situations, and they're struggling. Sarah's face is flushed, sweat-soaked, and her eyes have that characteristic blank stare that tells you nobody's home behind them. "Set her down here," you direct, pointing to a cot you've positioned away from other patients. The guards comply, but the moment they release their grip, Sarah tries to bolt. You'd expected this. It's in all the literature about PCP, so you and another nurse are ready, gently but firmly guiding her back to the cot. She's surprisingly strong. her muscles rigid with tension, and touching her is like touching a radiator. Her skin is dangerously hot. You pull out a thermometer, 104 degrees. This isn't just psychological. This is a medical emergency. You try to start an IV to get fluids into her, to bring her temperature down, but Sarah won't stay still long enough. Every time you get close with the needle, she thrashes, nearly injuring you, definitely injuring herself as she bangs her arms against the metal frame of the cot. "Sarah," you say, knowing she probably can't hear you but trying anyway, "I'm trying to help you. You're overheating. I need to cool you down." She responds by spitting at you and renewing her efforts to escape. The doctor arrives, one of the few actual MDs who volunteers at these festivals, and assesses the situation with the grim efficiency of someone who's seen this before. "We need to sedate her," he says, "but start with 5 milligrams of diazepam. Let's see if we can take the edge off." You administer the injection, have to hold her arms still while another volunteer holds her legs, and then you wait. Standard protocol says diazepam should calm her within 10 to 15 minutes. At the 20-minute mark, Sarah is unchanged. Still fighting, still burning up, still trapped in whatever nightmare dimension PCP has locked her into. 10 more, the doctor says, and you administer another dose. This would put most people to sleep. Sarah doesn't even seem to notice. The doctor pulls you aside. "Here's the thing about PCP," he says quietly. "It's not like other drugs where we can just counteract it. There's no antidote. We can try to manage symptoms, but mostly we're just buying time until her body processes it naturally. And that could take hours or even days. You spend the next 6 hours in rotating shifts, monitoring Sarah, trying to keep her temperature down with ice packs and cool towels, preventing her from hurting herself or others. She goes through periods of violent thrashing alternating with periods of catatonic stillness that are somehow more unnerving. During the still periods, her eyes are open but empty, and you wonder where she is, what she's experiencing in the chemical prison her brain has become. Around hour 5, she starts talking, not coherently, but in fragments that give you glimpses into her altered reality. The walls are breathing. The air is thick. I'm drowning in air. Why is everyone made of angles? I can see through you. Your insides are machines. We're all machines. Nothing is real. I'm not real. Am I real? Tell me if I'm real. It's heartbreaking and terrifying in equal measure, listening to someone's reality disintegrate in real time, knowing there's nothing you can do to speed up the process. Other patients are brought in throughout the night, more PCP cases, though none as severe as Sarah. The tent has transformed from a place of healing into a holding facility, a waiting room for people whose brains need time to metabolize poison. You're exhausted, running on adrenaline and the grim determination not to let any of these people hurt themselves while they're under your care. Your training covered wound care and vital signs, not psychiatric crisis management. You're making it up as you go, relying on instinct and compassion, and the hope that whatever you're doing isn't making things worse. By sunrise, Sarah is finally starting to come down. The violence has drained out of her, replaced by confusion and exhaustion. "Where am I?" she asks, her voice hoarse from hours of screaming. You explain gently that she's in the medical tent, that she had a bad reaction to something, that she's safe now. She has no memory of the past. 12 hours, not the fighting, not the terror, not the hours you spent keeping her from harming herself. It's gone, erased, like it happened to someone else. You help her sit up, give her water, explain that she needs to go to the hospital for observation. She's docile now, cooperative, almost childlike in her confusion. Looking at her, you'd never know that 6 hours ago it took 4 people to restrain her, that she displayed strength that seemed impossible, that she spent half the night convinced reality itself was her enemy. The drug has metabolized, the nightmares ended, and all that's left is a scared, confused young woman with no memory of being a hurricane. As the ambulance takes her away, you and the other medical staff collapse onto folding chairs, too tired to speak. The festival is still going. You can hear music starting up from the main stage, people cheering, life continuing as if the past night didn't happen. But it did happen, and it'll happen again. Probably. Tonight, because the drug is still out there, still being sold, still being taken by people who have no idea what they're signing up for. You think about your medical training, about the Hippocratic Oath, about first do no harm. But when the harm is already done, when it's coursing through someone's bloodstream and there's no antidote, no cure, just time and hope, what does do no harm even mean? All you can do is hold space, keep them safe, and wait for the storm to pass. Behind every PCP incident at a festival was a dealer who'd sold the drug, often misrepresenting what it was. Some did it knowingly, others were themselves misinformed, passing along bad drugs they'd been told were something else. The profit margins on PCP were so high that it became common practice to lace other drugs with it to stretch supplies. Marijuana could be dusted, cocaine could be cut with it, pills could contain it. Users thought they were getting one experience and ended up with something entirely different. The worst dealers were the ones who knew exactly what they were selling and didn't care. To them, the chaos that followed wasn't their problem. They'd be gone by the time the drug took effect, cash in hand, moving to the next festival. You're a dealer at a festival in 1974, and let's be clear about what that means. You're not some criminal mastermind or cartel operative. You're 24 years old, you've got student loans you can't pay, and you discovered that selling drugs at festivals can make you more money in a weekend than a month at any straight job that would hire someone with your resume. You started small, selling weed you grew yourself, maybe some mushrooms you picked from cow pastures. But the profit margins on those are thin, and the competition is everywhere. Everyone at festivals has weed. You need an edge. That's when your supplier, a guy you met through a friend of a friend, the kind of connection that exists in the grey zone between acquaintance and criminal accomplice, tells you about PCP. It's cheap to make, expensive to sell, and people can't get enough of it, he says, showing you a mason jar full of white powder. Tell them it's mescaline or THC. They won't know the difference until it's too late, and by then you're already gone. You hesitate because you've heard stories, but the math is compelling. You can turn a $100 investment into a $1,000 return in a single weekend. That's a lot of student loan payments. You start small, testing the market. You press the powder into capsules and sell them as organic mescaline to people who are already so high they're not asking detailed questions. Your pitch is smooth. This is the real stuff, man. Pure. It'll open your third eye. You charge $20 per capsule, highway robbery for what's actually inside, but festival pricing has its own logic. People are willing to pay premium prices for the promise of transcendence. You sell 10 capsules the first night, $200 in your pocket, and nobody comes looking for a refund. By Saturday, you've refined your approach. You've learned to identify your ideal customers, people who are already tripping, who've been at the festival long enough to have lowered their guard, who are seeking that next level of experience. You don't sell to obvious first-timers or people who seem overly cautious. You want believers, people who trust that the festival is a safe space and that everyone there is part of the same peaceful community. You're exploiting their trust and you know it, but you've developed a justification. They want to get high. I'm just facilitating that. What they do with the experience is on them. You're sitting on a blanket near the main stage, your product hidden in a hollowed-out book, because you've seen enough movies to know the aesthetic, when someone you sold to last night approaches. They look rough, exhausted, confused, with that 1,000-yard stare people get after traumatic experiences. "What the fuck did you sell me?" they ask, their voice shaking. "That wasn't mescaline. I ended up in the medical tent. I tried to fight a tree. I have no memory of 6 hours of my life." You go into damage control mode, the script you've prepared for exactly this situation. Hey man, everyone reacts differently to psychedelics. Maybe you took too much. Maybe you mixed it with something else. I can't control your set and setting. It's gaslighting, pure and simple, redirecting blame back to them, making it their fault for not being able to handle what you sold them. They stand there for a moment, trying to decide whether to push back, but they're too exhausted to fight. They walk away, and you feel a moment of relief followed immediately by a touch of something else, guilt, maybe, or the beginning of conscience trying to break through. By Sunday, you've sold 40 capsules, $800. You could stop, take your profit, call it a successful weekend. But then your supplier calls with an offer. I've got a new batch, even cheaper. You could double your margin. You meet him in the parking lot and he hands you a bag full of capsules that look identical to the ones you've been selling. What's the difference, you ask? He shrugs. This batch might be a little stronger. Just tell people to take half if they're nervous. You sell the new batch without adjusting your pitch. You don't tell people they're stronger. You don't suggest smaller doses. You just want to move product and get out before the festival ends. That night there are 3 medical emergencies in the campground nearest to where you are selling. People stripping naked, attacking tents, experiencing psychotic breaks. You hear about it through the grapevine, and you absolutely know, that it's your product. But you're already packing up your tent, already heading to your car, already counting the money and planning how you'll spend it. On the drive home, you try not to think about the people you hurt. You try to rationalize. They chose to take drugs. They knew the risks. I didn't force anyone to buy anything. But late at night, when you're alone with your thoughts, you remember the person who confronted you, the exhaustion and confusion in their face, the violated trust. You remember hearing about someone who had to be restrained, who fought security guards, who has no memory of becoming violent. You sold them that experience. You put that chemical in their hands, knowing it wasn't what you claimed, knowing it could hurt them, and you did it for $800. Some dealers eventually develop a conscience and get out. Others rationalize so effectively that they never feel the weight of what they've done. A few even convince themselves they're providing a service, that they're psychedelic shamans facilitating spiritual experiences rather than profiteers selling misrepresented drugs to vulnerable people. But regardless of how you frame it, the math is simple. Every capsule you sell is a lottery ticket, and the prizes range from uncomfortable evening to psychotic break requiring hospitalization. And you're the one selling tickets, collecting money, and walking away before the drawing. The worst part? You'll probably do it again next festival season. Because the money is too good, and the consequences feel abstract, and it's easy to convince yourself that the chaos that follows isn't really your responsibility. After all, you didn't force anyone to take anything. You just provided an opportunity, made a sale, collected payment. What happened after that? Not your problem. That's what you tell yourself anyway, as you count your profits and try not to think about the medical tent. By the mid-70s, PCP's reputation had reached a critical mass. Festival organisers were scrambling to address the problem. But how do you stop a drug that's odourless, tasteless, and can be hidden in dozens of forms? Drug testing at festival entrances was impractical and legally questionable. Warnings were issued, but they often just made people more curious. The summer of 1975 marked a turning point. At multiple major festivals that year, in California, Colorado, New York, there were serious incidents involving PCP, deaths, permanent injuries, arrests. The media, already suspicious of the counterculture movement, latched onto these stories. Headlines screamed about killer drugs and festival violence. Parents who'd been tolerant of their children's festival going suddenly became terrified. The image of festivals as peaceful gatherings began to crack. Instead, they were being painted as dangerous drug markets where young people went to lose their minds. You're a festival organizer in 1975, and what used to be your dream job has become a nightmare of liability and moral responsibility. You got into this business because you believed in the power of music to bring people together, to create temporary communities where the normal rules of society could be suspended in favour of something more authentic and joyful. Your first festival in 1969 was a beautiful chaos. 10,000 people, 3 bands, and a collective feeling that you were all participating in something historic, something that would change the world. Now, 7 years later, you're sitting in a meeting with lawyers, insurance agents, and local law enforcement, discussing how to prevent your festival from becoming the next headline about drug-related violence. The statistics are grim. At a festival in California last month, 3 people died. 1 from hyperthermia after taking PCP and running into the desert, stripping off clothes and collapsing from heat exhaustion before anyone found them. The 2nd drowned after diving into a lake, convinced they could breathe underwater. The 3rd fell from a significant height while trying to climb a cell tower, believing they needed to shut down the government signals. At a Colorado festival, 23 people were hospitalized for PCP-related incidents in a single weekend. In New York, a festival was shut down early after violent incidents overwhelmed security and medical staff. Your lawyer is explaining that you need to take reasonable precautions to protect attendees, or you'll be vulnerable to lawsuits. But what does reasonable mean when you're talking about a drug that can be hidden in cigarettes, pressed into pills disguised as vitamins, dissolved in beverages, or dusted onto marijuana? You can't search every person who enters. You don't have the staff, the authority, or the legal right. And even if you could, dealers are getting smarter, hiding product in false-bottom water bottles, in hollowed-out flashlights, in places you'd never think to look without conducting full strip searches. You try installing warning signs at the entrance. Beware. Dangerous drugs may be present. Angel dust/PCP can cause violent behaviour, and medical emergencies. If you see someone in distress, contact security immediately. The signs are large, impossible to miss, printed in bright colours with explicit warnings about the dangers, but you know how effective they'll be, which is to say, not very. People coming to festivals are optimistic, often already intoxicated, convinced that bad things happen to other people, not to them. A sign warning about dangers feels abstract compared to the immediate, tangible promise of a good time. You increase medical staff, hire in additional EMTs, and even a doctor to be on site full-time. You train security specifically in recognizing PCP symptoms and de-escalation techniques. You create a safe space area, a quiet tent with soft lighting and beanbags where people having difficult experiences can ride them out under supervision. It's expensive, all of it, eating into your already thin profit margins. Festival organising has never been lucrative, but now it's barely breaking even after all the additional safety measures. The media attention is relentless. Reporters show up at your festivals now, not to cover the music, but to look for drug incidents. They interview worried parents in parking lots, film people who are obviously intoxicated, and write sensationalized story about drug-fueled chaos and the dark side of festival culture. Every incident, no matter how minor, becomes a headline. Festival goer hospitalized after drug reaction. Violence erupts at music event. Parents, keep your kids away from festivals. The stories rarely mention that thousands of people had peaceful, joyful experiences, that only a tiny fraction of attendees had problems. Good news doesn't sell papers. Your attendance starts dropping. Parents who used to tolerate or even encourage their adult children's festival going are now forbidding it, painting festivals as dangerous drug dens rather than music celebrations. Local communities that once welcomed the economic boost of hosting festivals are now resistant, worried about liability and reputation. You have to fight harder for permits, pay higher insurance premiums, and navigate increasingly hostile relationships with local authorities who see festivals as problems to be managed rather than cultural events to be supported. You're sitting in your office one evening after a particularly difficult festival, 1 death, 17 hospitalizations, and 2 arrests for drug dealing, when you realize that something fundamental has shifted. The innocence is gone. The trust that made early festivals magical, the assumption that everyone there was part of the same peaceful tribe, has been replaced by suspicion and fear. People are watching each other warily. Security presence has increased to the point where it feels less like a festival and more like a controlled event. The spontaneity and freedom that made festivals special are being squeezed out by the need for safety protocols. You consider quitting, handing the operation to someone else, or just shutting down entirely and finding a different way to promote music and community. But then you think about the thousands of people who still have positive experiences, who still find connection and joy and transcendence at festivals. Don't they deserve spaces where that can happen? Isn't it worth fighting for, even if it's harder now, even if the business model is unsustainable, even if the cultural narrative has turned against you? The summer of 1975 marks the end of an era. Festivals will continue, but they'll never be quite the same. The utopian dream has been compromised by the reality that not everyone who shows up is peaceful, that some people are there to make money regardless of the harm they cause, and that certain drugs don't facilitate transcendence, they facilitate psychosis. You're trying to preserve something beautiful while acknowledging that it's also dangerous, trying to keep people safe while honouring the freedom and spontaneity that made festivals meaningful in the first place. It's an impossible balance, and some days you're not sure you're succeeding. But you keep trying, because giving up would mean letting the darkness win completely, and you're not ready to do that yet. Then came the story that would define PCP's impact on festivals. A bad batch distributed at a large West Coast festival in 1976. The details are murky, eyewitness accounts vary, and many participants were too intoxicated to provide reliable testimony, but the outline is clear. Someone brought an enormous quantity of PCP to the festival, pressed into pills and sold as mescaline. Over the course of a single evening, dozens of people took the pills. What followed was mass chaos. The medical tent was overwhelmed within an hour. Security was dealing with multiple violent incidents simultaneously. People were running into the woods, attacking each other, screaming about demons and government agents. One person tried to set a tent on fire. Another attempted to stop their own heart, convinced they were a robot that needed to be shut down. The festival had to be shut down early. Police were called in. Ambulances arrived in waves. By morning the ground was littered with medical debris, torn clothing, and the scattered remains of what was supposed to be a celebration. It was the beginning of the end. You're attending this festival as a regular participant, not working, not volunteering, just there to enjoy music with friends. It's Saturday night, and the headlining band has just started their set. The crowd is massive, maybe 15,000 people, and the energy is electric. You're dancing with your friends, feeling that beautiful collective rhythm that happens when thousands of people move together to the same music. Life is good. The world is good. Everything is exactly as it should be. Then you notice the first disturbance. A woman near the front of the crowd starts screaming, not the happy, excited screaming of someone having fun, but genuine terror screaming. She's clawing at her own face, shouting that bugs are under her skin, that she needs to get them out. Security moves toward her, and that's when you see the second incident. A man climbing the speaker tower, moving with that jerky, mechanical precision you've learned to recognize as PCP. Then a third, someone running full speed through the crowd, knocking people over, heading for the woods beyond the festival grounds. The band stops playing, the house lights come up, and that's when you see the scale of what's happening. All across the crowd, people are freaking out simultaneously. Not one or two isolated incidents, but dozens, maybe more. It's like watching dominoes fall, except each domino is a human being experiencing psychotic delusion. Some people are frozen in place, catatonic. Others are violent, fighting anyone who tries to help. Many are trying to flee, creating panic as they push through crowds of confused festival goers who don't yet understand what's happening. The medical tent is your first instinct. Go there, they'll know what's happening, they'll have answers. But as you approach, you see that the medical tent is ground zero for chaos. There are at least 20 people being treated simultaneously, and the volunteer staff is completely overwhelmed. You can hear shouting, crying, the sound of medical equipment being knocked over. Someone breaks out of the tent and sprints past you, naked, screaming about machines and demons and the end of everything. Security guards are running everywhere, trying to respond to multiple crises at once, their radios crackling with overlapping emergency calls. You find your friends, thank God they didn't take anything from the bad batch, and you huddle together trying to figure out what to do. Leave? Stay and try to help? The exits are clogged with people trying to evacuate, and you can hear festival organisers on the PA system attempting to maintain order. Please remain calm. Medical personnel are responding. Do not leave the main area. We need to account for everyone. But their voices sound thin, inadequate against the tide of chaos washing over the festival grounds. A girl approaches your group, maybe 19 years old, tears streaming down her face. "Have you seen my friend?" she asks desperately. "We took these pills like an hour ago and she just ran off. She said the trees were calling her. I can't find her anywhere and I'm starting to feel weird too." You watch her pupils, they're normal-sized, which is somehow more disturbing than if they were dilated. She's just starting her trip. You tell her to stay with you, to sit down, to try to stay calm, but even as you're saying it, you can see her slipping away, her expression changing from worried to suspicious. "Why do you want me to stay?" she asks. "Are you part of it? Are you trying to keep me here?" Then she's running, disappearing into the crowd, and you can't stop her. Ambulances start arriving, 1, then 3, then 6. But it's not enough. There aren't enough ambulances in the county to handle this many emergencies simultaneously. EMTs are having to make triage decisions. Who's violent enough to need immediate hospitalization? Who can be monitored on site? Who's in medical danger versus psychological distress? It's an impossible calculus, and you can see the stress on their faces as they make choices that might mean life or death. Police arrive in force, not the usual 1 or 2 officers assigned to festival security, but dozens of them, riot gear ready, looking like they're preparing for a war. In a way they are. They're trying to contain a situation that's already spiraling beyond control, trying to protect people from themselves and each other, trying to prevent a bad situation from becoming a catastrophic one. You watch as they set up a perimeter, restricting movement, corralling people into designated areas. The festival that began as a celebration of freedom has become something closer to a disaster zone. You spend the night helping where you can, guiding disoriented people to medical staff, keeping someone who's having a bad trip company until help arrives, handing out water to people who are overheating. You're not trained for any of this, but neither is anyone else, and all hands are needed. You watch the sun come up over a festival ground that looks like a battlefield. Torn tents, scattered belongings, exhausted medical personnel, police officers guarding people who are still too out of it to be released. By morning count, 43 people have been hospitalized. Hundreds more were treated on site. 1 person is dead, a young man who ran into the woods and fell from a cliff while trying to escape hallucinated pursuers. Another is missing, their fate unknown. The festival organisers announce that the event is over, that everyone needs to leave, that there will be no Sunday shows. People pack up their tents in Stunned silence. The music replaced by the sound of helicopter blades as media crews arrive to film the aftermath. The drive home is quiet. Nobody wants to talk about what you witnessed, but you know this will be the story that defines festival culture for years to come. Not the moments of connection and transcendence, not the beautiful sunsets or perfect musical moments, but this, the night a bad batch of PCP turned a celebration into a nightmare, proving that the dark side of drug culture could overwhelm even the best intentions. The summer of '76 becomes a dividing line. Before, when festivals felt magical and safe, and after, when everyone knew that chaos was always lurking, waiting for the wrong substance to be sold to the wrong people at the wrong time. The incidents couldn't be ignored anymore. Local and federal law enforcement agencies, already monitoring the counterculture movement with suspicion, saw PCP as both a threat and an opportunity. The drug enforcement administration classified PCP as a Schedule II controlled substance in 1978, acknowledging both its danger and its lack of accepted medical use. But by then it was everywhere. Police began training specifically in PCP encounters, learning techniques to handle subjects who felt no pain, displayed erratic behavior, and might be experiencing genuine psychosis. The warnings were stark. Approach with extreme caution. Use overwhelming force if necessary. Expect the unexpected. For festival security, this meant working more closely with law enforcement, something that ran counter to the counterculture ethos. Festivals that had once prided themselves on being police-free zones now had undercover officers circulating through crowds, looking for dealers and users. You're a police officer in 1977, assigned to a new specialty unit focused on drug enforcement at public gatherings. You didn't ask for this assignment, you were perfectly happy working traffic or responding to domestic disturbances, but the department decided they needed officers with youth outreach experience, which apparently means you once arrested someone under 30 without incident. Now you're sitting through a training session specifically about PCP, taught by a DEA agent who's showing slide after slide of people doing impossible, terrifying things while under the influence. Subject broke through a plate glass window with their bare hands. No reaction to pain. Click. Next slide. Subject fought off 5 officers before being subdued. Required 3 times the normal sedative dose. Click. Subject displayed paranoid delusions. Convinced everyone around them was trying to kill them. Attacked multiple bystanders. The agent's voice is flat, clinical, but the images are horrifying. These aren't hardened criminals or violent offenders. They're regular people. College students and office workers and musicians, transformed by a chemical into something dangerous and unpredictable. The training covers techniques you've never needed before. How to approach someone on PCP without triggering a violent response. Spoiler, there's no reliable way. How to use verbal de-escalation when the person you're talking to has no grip on reality. Good luck. How to physically restrain someone who doesn't feel pain and is operating without normal human strength limitations. It takes more people than you'd think. The overriding message is clear. PCP encounters are dangerous, unpredictable, and can go sideways in seconds. Officers have been seriously injured, even killed, in confrontations with PCP users. Treat every encounter as potentially lethal. You're given a new protocol sheet to memorize. Approach from distance. Assess for weapons. Request backup immediately. Do not attempt solo restraint. Expect superhuman strength and pain tolerance. Verbal commands likely ineffective. Use overwhelming force to ensure safety. It reads like instructions for handling a wild animal rather than a human being, but the statistics back it up. PCP users are responsible for a disproportionate number of officer injuries and violent confrontations. The drug strips away inhibition, empathy, and the basic human responses that allow most police interactions to remain relatively calm. Your first real PCP encounter happens at a music festival 3 weeks after your training. You're there undercover, jeans, t-shirt, trying to blend in with the crowd while watching for drug transactions. Your radio crackles. Officer needs assistance. North Campground. Subject on PCP, violent, multiple victims. You run toward the scene, your heart rate spiking, all your training suddenly feeling inadequate. When you arrive, you find 4 security guards trying to restrain one person, a woman who's maybe 120 pounds but fighting like she weighs twice that. Her eyes are wild, unfocused. She's covered in scratches and bruises but doesn't seem to notice them. When she sees you approaching, "In your civilian clothes," she screams, "More of them! They're everywhere! The agents are everywhere!" You call for backup and try to assess the situation. 3 people are injured, all guards who tried to help and got hit, bitten, or thrown aside. The woman is still fighting, still shouting about government agents and mind control and needing to escape before they reprogram her. You attempt verbal de-escalation, exactly as trained. Calm voice, non-threatening posture, clear, simple statements. "We're here to help you. You're safe. Nobody's trying to hurt you." She responds by charging at you with such sudden speed that you barely sidestep in time. Backup arrives. 3 uniformed officers, all trained in PCP encounters. Together you move in with overwhelming force, which in practice means 6 grown adults working to control one woman who outweighs none of you individually. Even with 6 people, it's a struggle. She's incredibly strong, her muscles rigid with drug-induced tension and completely unresponsive to pain compliance techniques that would normally work. Wrist locks don't faze her. Pressure points have no effect, she's not feeling any of it. Eventually you get her restrained with plastic cuffs and move her to a secure area to wait for medical transport. She's still shouting, still thrashing, still absolutely convinced that you're all part of a conspiracy against her. An EMT arrives and explains that they'll need to sedate her for transport, that she's a danger to herself and others in her current state. They administer what seems like an enormous dose of tranquilizer, and you watch as it slowly, agonizingly slowly, begins to take effect. Her movements become less frantic. Her shouting quiets to mumbling, and finally she's calm enough to be loaded into an ambulance. The aftermath involves paperwork, so much paperwork. Incident reports, witness statements, medical documentation, use of force reports explaining why it took 6 officers to restrain one person. You write it all up in the dry clinical language required by departmental guidelines. But what you can't capture in the reports is how disturbing it was, how wrong it felt to watch a human being completely lose themselves to a chemical, how helpless you felt despite your training and backup and authority. The festival organisers are grateful for police presence, but also visibly uncomfortable with it. You represent a fundamental shift in festival culture, from spaces of freedom and experimentation to spaces that require law enforcement oversight. Some festival goers thank you. Others glare with open hostility, viewing you as the enemy, as the establishment trying to shut down their culture. You're caught in the middle, trying to keep people safe while also representing an authority that many festival goers fundamentally distrust. Over the following months, you work dozens of festivals and concerts. The pattern repeats: PCP incidents, violent confrontations, restraints, hospitalizations. You start to recognize the signs from a distance, the jerky movements, the blank stare, the excessive sweating, the hyper-aggressive posture. You become efficient at these encounters, learning which techniques work: overwhelming numbers, minimal verbal engagement, swift restraint, and which don't, trying to reason with them, pain compliance, assuming they'll respond to normal human cues. But efficiency doesn't make it less disturbing. Each encounter reinforces the same lesson. PCP doesn't just alter consciousness, It demolishes it, leaving something primitive and terrified in its place. And your job is to contain that, to prevent harm, to be the barrier between people experiencing chemical psychosis and the innocent bystanders who just wanted to hear music. It's exhausting work, morally complicated, and sometimes you go home and wonder if there's a better approach, a solution that doesn't involve treating human beings like dangerous animals. But then your radio crackles with another PCP call, and you're running toward chaos again, hoping your training holds, hoping backup arrives fast, hoping nobody, not you, not the user, not any bystanders, gets seriously hurt. Because in PCP encounters, hope is sometimes all you've got. The PCP crisis created a schism in festival culture. On one side were the old guard, the true believers who insisted that festivals could still be spaces of peace and experimentation if people just stuck to safe psychedelics. On the other were the realists who argued that the scene had been compromised, that the innocence was gone, that you couldn't trust anything anymore. Some festivals tried to evolve, implementing stricter security, drug testing, and harm reduction programs. Others doubled down on the original vision, insisting that increased security was antithetical to the spirit of freedom that festivals represented. And some simply shut down, organisers deciding that the liability and the chaos weren't worth it anymore. The festival scene didn't die, but it changed. The massive, unregulated gatherings of the late 60s gave way to smaller, more controlled events. The trust that had characterised early festival culture, the belief that everyone there was part of the same peaceful tribe, was replaced by wariness and suspicion. You're at a meeting of festival organisers in 1978, and the room is tense with unspoken disagreement. 20 people around a table, all of them veterans of the festival circuit, all of them trying to figure out how to preserve something that might already be lost. The meeting was called to discuss the PCP problem, but what it's really about is a fundamental philosophical divide about what festivals should be. Marcus speaks first. He's old guard, one of the original organisers who helped put together some of the legendary gatherings of the late 60s. "We're losing what made this special," he says, his voice passionate. "Festivals were supposed to be spaces outside the normal rules, places where people could experiment and explore without Big Brother watching. Now we're talking about metal detectors, drug-sniffing dogs, police presence. That's not a festival. That's a prison with better music." He's not wrong, exactly. The surveillance and security apparatus being discussed does fundamentally change the nature of these gatherings. But several people around the table flinch at his characterization. Jennifer responds, her voice tight with frustration. She's younger, organized her first festival just 3 years ago, and has already dealt with 2 deaths at her events, both PCP related. I respect the idealism, Marcus. I really do. But I also have 2 parents who will never forgive me for the fact that their kids came to my festival and died. Died, Marcus. Not had bad trips. Not got arrested. Died. So forgive me if I'm willing to compromise on ideological purity in favour of people actually surviving the weekend. The room goes quiet. Nobody wants to talk about the deaths, but they're the subtext of every decision being made. The proposals on the table represent different philosophical approaches. One suggests mandatory drug testing at entrances. Anyone with prohibited substances gets turned away. It would reduce the drug presence inside, but also raise massive privacy concerns and might not even be legal. Another proposes harm reduction stations where people can anonymously test substances to see if they're what they were sold and get medical advice without fear of legal consequences. A third suggests simply increasing security presence to such a degree that dealers won't risk operating, essentially making festivals unwelcoming to drug culture entirely. Tom, who's organised festivals for a decade, tries to bridge the divide. Look, we all know PCP is the problem, not psychedelics in general. What if we focused education on that specifically? Posters, announcements, peer educators circulating through crowds warning people about angel dust. We don't have to become security states. We just have to be honest about which substances are incompatible with the festival experience. It's a reasonable middle ground approach, but both sides have objections. The old guard thinks any official messaging about drugs legitimizes authority intervention. The realists point out that education hasn't stopped the crisis so far, that people will take what they're sold regardless of warnings. The meeting devolves into smaller arguments. Some organisers are planning to continue exactly as they have, refusing to implement any new security measures, believing that the solution is cultural rather than structural. If the community collectively rejects PCP, the problem will solve itself. Others are going full security lockdown, searching bags, having security walk through crowds, even banning certain types of clothing associated with drug culture. A few are just giving up entirely, announcing they're out after this season, that the liability and moral weight are too much. You listen to all of it and realise that what's really being discussed is the death of an ideal. The early festival culture was built on trust that people would be responsible, that the community would self-regulate, that freedom wouldn't be abused. PCP has shattered that trust completely. Now everyone suspects everyone. Is that dealer selling real LSD or PCP disguised as LSD? Is that person having a mystical experience or a psychotic break? Can you accept a joint from a stranger, or might it be laced with something that will destroy your mind? The questions never used to exist. Now they're unavoidable. The meeting ends without consensus. Each organiser will do what they think is right, implementing their own policies, hoping their approach works. But everyone leaves knowing that the festival scene is fragmenting, that there won't be a unified culture anymore, just different factions operating according to different principles. The massive, sprawling festivals that drew hundreds of thousands, those are ending, replaced by smaller, more controlled events that feel less like cultural movements and more like commercial concerts with camping. Over the following years, you watch the split solidify. Some festivals become heavily policed events where the drug culture is driven underground, existing in whispers and careful transactions in tent shadows. Others become havens for people seeking the old freedom, but with an undercurrent of danger because anyone could be selling anything, and trust has become a quaint relic of the past. A few find a middle path, implementing harm reduction without authoritarianism, creating spaces that are safer without feeling oppressive. But none of them recapture the magic of the early days, when festivals felt like glimpses of a better world rather than calculated risks in pursuit of a good time. The PCP crisis did what law enforcement, media panic and cultural backlash couldn't. It divided the festival community against itself, making people who shared a love of music and experience view each other with suspicion and judgment. The old guard sees the new security measures as betrayal of core values. The safety-focused see resistance to security as reckless endangerment. And caught in the middle are thousands of people who just want to hear music, feel connected, and maybe explore altered consciousness without either dying or being treated like criminals. The festival scene survives, but it's wounded, fractured, fundamentally changed by a drug that promised transcendence and delivered only chaos. The mainstream media had been skeptical of counterculture from the beginning, but PCP gave them ammunition that was impossible to ignore. Every festival incident became front-page news. Drug-crazed youth attacks police. Festival becomes war zone. Parents, is your child's music event a death trap? The coverage was sensationalized, often inaccurate and almost always focused on the most extreme incidents while ignoring the thousands of peaceful attendees. Television news crews would camp outside festivals, waiting for medical emergencies to film. Newspapers published photos of people being restrained or loaded into ambulances, images that confirmed every parent's worst fear. The reporting rarely mentioned that PCP was fundamentally different from other psychedelics, that the vast majority of festival goers never touched it, or that many incidents involved people who had been sold mislabeled drugs. Nuance didn't sell papers, Fear did, and the media discovered that PCP stories sold extremely well. You're a journalist in 1977, working for a mid-sized newspaper that's been covering the festival scene with increasing alarm. Your editor called you into his office this morning with an assignment. Go to that festival upstate this weekend. Get me something on the drug problem. Parents are scared, and they want answers. You've been to festivals before, covered them as cultural events, interviewed musicians, written pieces about the communal aspects and the artistic expression. But this assignment is different. Your editor doesn't want a balanced piece. He wants fear, drama, the kind of story that makes people clutch their pearls and thank God their children are safe at home. You arrive at the festival on Friday evening with a photographer named Rick, who's already complaining about the mud and the smell. The first thing you notice is how young everyone looks, mostly late teens and 20s, dressed in tie-dye and denim, passing joints openly, dancing to music that spills from multiple stages. It looks, honestly, pretty peaceful. But you're not here to write about peace. You're here to find the dark underbelly, the drug casualties, the proof that festivals are dangerous. You set up near the medical tent because your editor specifically told you that's where the stories are. Stake it out, he said. Wait for something to happen. It will. You feel gross doing it, camping outside a medical facility waiting for people's worst moments to become your content, but journalism is a job, and jobs have requirements. Rick sets up his camera with a telephoto lens, and you both wait. The first incident happens around 10 p.m. A young woman is brought to the medical tent by friends, clearly distressed but not violent. She's crying, talking rapidly about seeing things that aren't there, but responding to her friend's reassurance. The medical staff takes her in, and 10 minutes later she's sitting on a cot with a blanket, drinking water, calming down. It's a bad trip, nothing more. Rick gets photos anyway, zoomed-in shots of her distressed face, her friends looking worried. That's good, he says. Anguish sells. You conduct interviews, approaching people near the medical tent and asking about drug use. Most people are honest. Yes, they smoke marijuana. Some have tried LSD or mushrooms. They're careful about what they take and who they take it from. But these responses don't fit the narrative your editor wants. You need to find the horror stories, the cautionary tales, the parents' nightmares made real. So you keep fishing, asking leading questions. Have you seen anyone get violent? Anyone freaking out? Anyone who seemed dangerous? Eventually, you find people willing to share scary stories. Someone who saw a guy punch a tree until his knuckles bled. A girl who witnessed a naked person running through a campsite. Rumours of ambulances being called. The big break comes Saturday night when an actual PCP incident occurs. A man, probably mid-20s, starts acting erratically near the main stage. Security intervenes, there's a struggle, and eventually police are called. You and Rick are there for all of it, taking notes and photos as the situation escalates. The man is clearly not in control of himself, shouting about conspiracies, fighting anyone who tries to help, his face a mask of terror and rage. It's disturbing to watch, genuinely frightening. But it's also the story your editor wanted. Rick gets the money shot, the man being restrained by 4 officers, his face contorted, his body straining against the restraints. It's a powerful image, visceral and disturbing. You interview the officers, the security guards, and even try to interview the man's friends who are devastated and begging you not to use their names or photos. He's not a bad person, one friend says, tears streaming down her face. Someone sold him something bad. He didn't know what he was taking. Please don't make him look like a monster. But that's exactly what your editor wants. A monster, a cautionary tale, proof that festivals are where good kids go bad. You write the story on Sunday, sitting in your hotel room while Rick develops photos. The headline practically writes itself. Drug violence erupts at music festival. One man's terrifying descent. Your article focuses almost entirely on the PCP incident, mentioning in passing that drugs of all kinds circulate freely at these events, without distinguishing between marijuana and PCP, between people having peaceful experiences and violent psychotic breaks. You include quotes from worried parents you interviewed in the parking lot, people who weren't even at the festival but heard about problems and showed up looking for their kids. You describe the scene in the medical tent in lurid detail, emphasizing chaos and danger while downplaying the fact that medical staff successfully handled every situation. You mention the police presence as evidence that these events have become too dangerous for local security to handle alone. The article runs on Monday's front page with Rick's photo prominently displayed, the man mid-restraint, looking absolutely out of control, the perfect visual representation of every parent's fear. The headline is even more sensational than you wrote. The editor changed it to Festival of Fear. Inside the drug-fueled violence of modern music events. Your nuanced mentions that most attendees were peaceful cut for space. Your explanation that PCP is different from other psychedelics, buried in paragraph 12 where nobody will read it. The response is immediate and massive. Letters pour in from concerned parents, thanking the paper for exposing the truth. Local politicians start calling for stricter festival regulations. Schools use your article in drug education programs, holding it up as proof of what can happen when young people make bad choices. You become the paper's go-to festival reporter, sent to every event within 100 miles to find more horror stories, more cautionary tales, more proof that the counterculture is dangerous and parents should be very, very worried. But at night, alone with your thoughts, you remember the friend's tearful plea. Please don't make him look like a monster. You remember the thousands of people you saw having peaceful, joyful experiences, connecting with friends, enjoying music, causing no harm. You remember that the narrative you helped construct, festivals as drug-fueled chaos zones, is technically accurate but fundamentally misleading. Yes, bad things happen. Yes, PCP is dangerous. But the overwhelming majority of people at festivals never touch it, never experience violence, never become the cautionary tales that fill newspapers. You've become complicit in a moral panic, using extreme incidents to paint an entire culture as dangerous, playing on parental fears to sell newspapers and further your career. The man in your photo, the one being restrained, looking terrifying, is someone's son, someone's friend, someone who made a mistake or was deceived by a dealer and paid for it with the worst night of his life. And now his worst moment is immortalized in thousands of newspapers, used as propaganda against a cultural movement that's far more complex than drug-fueled violence. Other journalists are doing the same thing at other festivals. The coverage becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. Media reports on festival danger, which makes parents more scared, which generates more media interest, which leads to more sensational coverage. No one's writing about the medical volunteers who work tirelessly to keep people safe. No one's covering the festival organisers who are trying desperately to address the PCP problem without destroying the culture. No one's interviewing the thousands of people who have meaningful, positive experiences. Those stories don't sell. You've helped turn PCP from a specific drug problem into a symbol of everything wrong with youth culture. You've contributed to a narrative that will be used to justify increased law enforcement, stricter regulations, and the slow suffocation of festival culture. And the worst part? You're not even sure you're wrong to have done it. The danger is real. People are getting hurt. Parents deserve to know the risks. But somewhere between inform the public and feed the panic, You crossed a line you can't quite identify, and every time you're sent to cover another festival, you carry that weight. The knowledge that your words will be weaponized against people who just wanted to hear music and feel connected to something larger than themselves. So here we are, at the end of the story about how a discontinued horse tranquilizer destroyed the utopian dream of festival culture and proved that not every door of perception should be opened. You've followed PCP from sterile laboratories, where well-meaning chemists thought they'd created the future of surgery, through underground production facilities where profit mattered more than human life, into festival grounds where trust was weaponized and transcendence became psychosis. You've watched as a single drug, cheap to make, easy to disguise, impossible to control, dismantled an entire cultural movement brick by brick, body by body, nightmare by nightmare. The thing about PCP is that it didn't just ruin music festivals. It ruined the idea that communities built on trust and freedom could self-regulate, that people seeking altered consciousness would naturally gravitate towards safe choices, that the counterculture's rejection of authority would produce something better than the straight world it was rebelling against. PCP exposed the vulnerability at the heart of that idealism. When you create spaces without rules, someone will always exploit the freedom for profit. When you build culture on trust, someone will always betray it. And when you encourage experimentation without establishing boundaries, eventually someone will cross a line that destroys everything. The festival scene survived, but it had to compromise every principle it once held sacred. Security replaced openness. Surveillance replaced trust. Controlled venues replaced sprawling gatherings under open skies. The music continued, but the magic was gone, or at least fundamentally altered, transformed from spontaneous celebration into managed entertainment. The people who experienced the festival era before PCP often speak about it with a particular kind of grief, mourning not just what was lost, but what can never be recreated. Because you can't unknow danger once you've seen it. You can't rebuild innocence after it's been shattered. And the casualties weren't just cultural. Real people, thousands of them, had their lives permanently altered or ended by a drug they often didn't even know they were taking. People who thought they were getting mescaline or THC or MDMA, who trusted dealers, who believed the festival was a safe space, who made one decision that seemed harmless and paid for it with psychotic breaks, lasting trauma, broken relationships, and shattered minds. Some recovered, some didn't. All of them carry the weight of knowing that a single moment of trust destroyed something they can never get back. The dealers, the underground chemists, the people who knowingly sold misrepresented. Drugs, most of them got away with it. A few were arrested and prosecuted, but the vast majority simply moved on, took their profits, and disappeared into normal life while their customers struggled with the aftermath. There's no justice in that, no cosmic balance. Just the brutal reality that causing harm is often easier and more profitable than preventing it, and that the people who create chaos rarely face consequences proportional to the damage they've done. Today, PCP still exists. It's less common than it was in the 70s, but it hasn't disappeared. It still shows up at festivals, clubs, street corners, anywhere people are seeking altered states and dealers are seeking profit. The warnings are better now, the harm reduction more established, the medical response more sophisticated. But the fundamental dynamic hasn't changed. A cheap, powerful drug that transforms people into dangers to themselves and others, sold by people who don't care about consequences, taken by people who don't know what they're really getting. The festival culture that exists now, with its security checkpoints and medical tents and harm reduction organizations and police presence, is the direct descendant of the PCP crisis. Every safety measure, every warning sign, every drug testing kit is a response to the chaos that unfolded between 1967 and 1983. We learned, collectively and painfully, that freedom without structure is vulnerability, that trust without verification is dangerous, and that not every substance that promises transcendence delivers anything except trauma. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in a world where festivals are safer but less free, where drug testing exists but casualties still occur, where the idealism of the 60s feels like a distant fever dream, maybe spare a thought for the people who lived through the PCP era. The ones who survived bad trips and violent episodes and hospitalizations, the ones who didn't survive, the organizers who tried to preserve something beautiful and watched it crumble, the medical volunteers who worked through chaos trying to save lives with inadequate resources, the security guards who got hurt protecting people from themselves, and even the dealers and chemists who taught us the hard lesson that evil doesn't always announce itself with horns and a pitchfork. Sometimes it just looks like a guy at a festival selling pills and promising enlightenment. The drug that ruined music festivals wasn't the one anyone expected. It wasn't marijuana or LSD or cocaine, substances people argued about but generally understood. It was PCP, a chemical most people had never heard of until it was too late. A substance that didn't fit into any existing category of psychedelic experience. A drug that proved that consciousness expansion could also mean consciousness demolition. And in destroying the festival scene, it destroyed a particular kind of innocence, the belief that seeking altered states was inherently positive, that communities built on music and experimentation would naturally produce beauty rather than chaos, that freedom was always preferable to structure. We know better now. We've learned, at a cost measured in destroyed lives and ruined gatherings and cultural movements that imploded under the weight of their own idealism. The lesson is harsh but important. Not every door should be opened. Not every substance should be tried. Not every promise of transcendence leads anywhere except darkness. And sometimes the price of learning that lesson is paid by people who never signed up for the education, who just wanted to hear music and feel connected and experience something larger than themselves. So sleep well tonight, in your world of drug testing and harm reduction and security checkpoints. These things exist because people before you paid the price of their absence. The festival you'll never attend, the massive, unregulated, trust-based gathering where anything could happen, and often did, it's gone. Killed by a drug that turned transcendence into psychosis and proved that utopia is fragile, that innocence can't survive exploitation, and that the line between enlightenment and nightmare is sometimes just a capsule sold by someone who doesn't care whether you live or die. Rest easy. The angel dust is mostly settled. But somewhere in the ruins of festival culture, you can still hear the echo of music that used to feel like freedom, back before anyone knew that freedom could be so dangerous, so exploitable, and so very, very expensive. Sweet dreams, and maybe double-check what's in that drink before you accept it from a stranger. The 70s taught us that much at least.